Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Barkha Dutt. And the four women I have here with me this evening all represent different countries, different cultures, and of course, different points of view. But there is one thing they have in common. They were all born Muslim. How they have engaged with the faith that they were born into, or in some cases disengaged with it, of course, is a very personal and individual story for all four of them. So let me first introduce our panel this evening, these four extraordinary, independent-minded, fiercely opinionated women, and then I'll frame the terms for the conversation that we hope to have today. First up, Hibak Usman. She's from Somalia, part of a growing movement to end violence against women and also working on delivering sustainable democracy to the Arab world. Zahra Langi is a Libyan women's rights activist. She's from Benghazi. Benghazi is in the news in America for all the wrong reasons, but she's here, of course, for all the right reasons, so welcome, Zahra. Farha Pandit, born in India, that's my country, but then, of course, raised American, was the first ever special representative to Muslim communities under both Secretaries Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And finally, Somalia-born but Dutch-American, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, perhaps one of the most famous, globally known critics and dissidents of Islam, someone who has actually had to face death threats and a fatwa for her contentious views on the religion that she was born into. Now, at a time when we live in the age of the Islamic State, and at a time of growing radicalism, the question that we are confronted with today as women is whether Islam is innately biased against women. Are Muslim women then somehow more oppressed than women of other faiths? Or is it those who distort Islam who are responsible for this misogyny? That is the question we face today. Of course, some of you might ask why we're here to discuss women in Islam. Why not women and religion? Aren't all religions, Christianity and Hinduism included, tilted against women? And finally, do you even need the excuse of religion to talk about misogyny? Look closer home at Donald Trump. What he said about women, according to me, is so much worse than the Muslim fundamentalists he seeks to keep out of the United States of America. And that would naturally take me to my first question. I want to start with you.
Correction. It was not only the fundamentalists he wanted to keep out, it was Muslims.
No, I said so-called Muslim fundamentalists.
Yes.
And that's why my point is that you don't actually need any religion to display your misogyny in the brazen way that he has. And that would take me to Ayaan, because you have argued that there is something innately in Islam that is not just violent, but also leans against women. You have traveled the full journey from declaring yourself an atheist at one point to being willing more recently to engage with the reformists within Islam. But you have stuck to your position that there is a problem in the faith. And I would put to you that there are so many misogynists and they belong to so many different religions. Why are you picking only on Islam?
Thank you. Any public relations person will tell you never open your remarks with statistics. And I'm famous for being disobedient. And so I'm going to do just that. And I'm going to take from a Pew Research, and Pew does this research on religion, and particularly in the Islamic world, year after year. In 2013, they had the following question. They have this question all the time, but here goes. Do you favor or oppose making Sharia law or Islamic law the official law of the land in our country? 72% of Indonesians, 99% of Afghanis, 82% of Bangladeshis, 84% of Pakistanis, 74% of Egyptians, and on and on and on it goes, these overwhelming majorities of Muslims who favor Islamic law. My position is, and has always been, let's make a distinction between Islam as a doctrine and Muslims as fellow human beings who are incredibly diverse. I embrace Muslims, but I reject Islamic law. I reject Islamic law because it's totalitarian. I reject Islamic law because it's bigoted, and especially bigoted against women. Where Islamic law becomes the law of the land, if these attitudes are translated into law, women will need a male guardian. Child marriage is reintroduced. You'll be disinherited. If you're raped, it's your fault and you get stoned to death. And we see numerous examples of that today. I reject Islamic law because it's inherently hostile to women. It is so bigoted. And everything we talk about in this conference regarding Islamic women, we condemn all of these practices, but we will not defeat, we will not eradicate these practices unless we talk about the principle, and the principle is enshrined in Islamic law unreformed.
Aren't the orthodoxies of all religions inherently misogynistic? I come from a country that has among the largest Muslim populations in the world. Muslim women in India are fighting for the right to enter mosques the same way as men. But guess what? So are Hindu women. Menstruating women of a certain age are not allowed into temples. Closer home here in the United States of America, it's certainly Christianity that informs the debate on abortion. To me, coming from a so-called third world country, I find it shocking that America debates abortion.
We have 30 minutes to talk about women in Islam. I think absolutely everything you said is right. Misogyny exists in every religion, in every culture, and in every geographical territory. But can we please, for just these 30 minutes, focus on the topic?
Let me take that. Let me take that to Zahra.
Let's just give them 30 minutes.
Yeah, 30 minutes is not enough, but we'll try our best.
And unfortunately, 30 minutes is not enough to talk about women in Islam, women in Islamic Sharia. It's not enough. And I think one of the problems is that we tend to have reductionist views and simplistic, flattenist views of Sharia. There's no such thing as Islamic law. There's something called Sharia, and Sharia is a dynamic process. It has to be contextualized. So my problem here today with Ayaan is that Ayaan shares the same view that radical Islamists have on Sharia. They think Sharia is a set of rigid laws, whereas Sharia has developed over time and space. There is no position on a unified position on certain views as in divorce, in marriage, and this explains why we have diverse schools of legal thought.
Zahra, let me interrupt you there to just say that none of us are theologists, so we aren't going to spend these 30 minutes debating the interpretations of the scriptures, because then we could just be here forever. What we have to look at is whether cultures have evolved differently in different countries, because there is a text Sharia law, but that's not how many countries across the world implement it. In many countries, in secular democratic countries, it's the constitution of countries that's supreme.
One of the problems is it's very difficult to have a disinformed debate on this topic that is politicized as it is today. Sharia is a process, dynamic process. Sharia is not a text. We have one text that is the Quran, and we have ahadith, the sayings of the Prophet. So these are the scriptures. However, the interpretation and the misinterpretation as well has been what developed the whole Islamic tradition of Sharia and theology. So Sharia deals with laws, theology deals with matters that is related
Zahra, let me put it to you like this. If you had to explain to Ayaan why you might be facing misogyny because you're a woman, but you're not necessarily facing misogyny just because you're a Muslim, what would you say? There's a distinction there.
Yeah, I think gender intersects with several categories. It intersects with culture, religion, class, age, a lot of things. So there is misogyny. We are on the front line in our societies as we've been fighting for over years, and specifically the 5 last years, to ensure that there are human rights, women's rights in our society. We admit there is misogyny. However, we do not say that this misogyny is innately inherent in Islam. This misogyny is embedded in cultural customs.
Quick interjection there before I bring in Farah and Hibak in, Ayaan. You've been quoted as saying that if refugees are coming to this part of the world and bringing their misogynistic views on Sharia law, then they better just take a legal U-turn. That's what you've said on record. And people have said Ayaan Hirsi and Donald Trump are speaking the same language, and he's a misogynist. I mean, I don't even want to complete that sentence when I think of him. So how do you feel like being on the same side as Trump?
I've been doing this for about the last 14 or 15 years, and maybe I'm allowed a sigh.
It's my job to provoke, so.
A sigh. Because number one, I'm amazed at the betrayal of Muslim women who, for whatever reason, have had an education and are able to emancipate themselves from Islamic law, insisting that Islamic law is not what it is and that we don't understand it. We live in the information age. We are literate. Any of us here can pick up the Holy Quran and read the Hadith, and beyond that, because we live in this age of interconnectedness, we can take a look at the facts of where Islamic law is implemented, what it looks like for everyone, and typically what it looks like for women. So Saudi Arabia is a country that implements Sharia law. Women are not allowed to drive. They have male guardians. Their testimony is worth half of that of men. They are subjected to every possible humiliation that you can think of. Ayatollah Khomeini, in 1979, with a great deal of public approval, became the supreme leader. He implemented Sharia law, Islamic law. You know, one of the first things that he did, he reduced the age of marriage to 9. Everywhere where Islamic law is implemented, you have exactly that. How do they justify it? They'll say, they've said this to me, Muslim organizations.
Who's the they?
Those who are pushing for Sharia law. And those who want to implement Sharia law.
That's not a matter of debate.
The Prophet Muhammad took Aisha, one of his wives after Khadija died, when she was 6, and had sex with her when she was 9. That is Sharia law. I do not understand how someone
But this is not a debate about Sharia law. But this is not a debate about the Sharia law.
Excuses for Sharia law.
But this is not a debate about the Sharia.
You want to get rid of child marriage? Get rid of Sharia law.
So you know what? Although it embarrasses me on a global stage to say this, child marriage is common in many cultures, including in Hindu societies in India.
I just
want to bring in Farah and Hibak. Hibak.
First of all, there is only 10 minutes left.
No, 15, so don't waste time.
Okay, I'm not going to waste time.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you are saying, Ayaan, it doesn't really make sense. I'm glad that you have moved from calling a war on Islam to saying maybe there is a possibility. 2007, when you had that interview with Reason magazine, you said we have to go to war with Islam. That was shocking. For a woman to be advocating for that.
I ask you all
let her have a say. You had your say. Let her have a say.
You're accusing me of something I haven't said.
No, you said that Islam, unless Islam is defeated, we will not.
Okay, let me put it to you like this. Let me put it to you like this.
For someone who has actually asked for Islam to be defeated militarily, I am really surprised that you are still talking about saying the same things.
Islamic law,
and now
ladies and gentlemen,
you are backpedaling
Islamic law,
and you are saying, well, there is going to be
Islamic law.
We'll do this one at a time.
So,
we'll do this one at a time.
For someone who has called for military, defeat of Islam,
you're saying
your
that given
credibility to talk about reform does not exist.
Okay, I'll tell you one thing.
How
none
are
of
you
these
going to
women
form
are
when you
oppressed
don't
by their religion.
No, I'm sorry. My point is you cannot reform anything if you don't have the credibility. The fact that you said we have to defeat Islam, you surrendered your credibility.
Let me come in.
That's why women have voice. Because we get allowed.
Let me come here. Just one second. I'm not censoring you.
No, but the point is, the point is, I just want to say something. The point is, those who claim to be able to reform their society have to be in their society.
Okay. So what you're saying? Let me ask you a question. I'm asking you a question.
Go ahead.
You're saying that since Ayaan has at some point declared war on Islam, there's no point engaging in this conversation with her. Reform has to come from within the Muslim society itself. Am I summarizing you right? Farha, that's what you try and do. You have an outreach.
But wait a second.
No. I just want to
You're not going to put work in
All right. Okay, hang on. Everybody hang on. Ayaan,
I have to make this.
You have to allow somebody else to speak. You have to allow someone who hasn't spoken to speak.
I will.
Go for it.
I have to make my point.
Go for it. I'll come to you.
But you can't say the prophet.
Can we please be democratic and allow everybody to speak? You will have your turn. Farah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm at this point unclear what the question is.
Okay, my question is this. When you have such gaps in this conversation as we are seeing between Ayaan and Hibak, how does somebody like you who has served in administration reconcile what seem to be irreconcilable differences? And let me now argue this from Ayaan's perspective. Is there too much political correctness? Are we in denial about the roots of fundamentalism? And is that why we are potentially losing to radicalism?
So there's a lot embedded in that, and I just give me a minute to sort of unpack part of it. The first is something really important that you said, which is Islam is not a monolith. There is great diversity within Islam.
Yes.
This is a religion that's been on the planet for 1,400 years. So it's important to understand that as you travel around the world, as I did, to more than 80 countries around the world, talking to Muslim youth under the age of 30 globally, you hear many different voices of what it means to be a Muslim woman. The most important thing to say is that for this generation that's grown up after 9/11, the millennials, the Muslim millennials, they do not want to be pigeonholed as one thing. And it is important that this audience and those that are watching understand and respect the diversity of Islam and understand that the journeys for all of these young women mean that they have to have their voices brought forward. And in the work that I did as special representative to Muslim communities, I was working at the grassroots, listening to what this generation has to say.
But pick up the example of Saudi Arabia. Pick up the example that Ayaan raised about Saudi Arabia.
Very particular, because you brought up countries in the Middle East, which are very important. You yourself brought up India, which is also very important. But Muslims in Muslim majority countries, as well as Muslims that live as minorities, are important. And they deserve dignity. Because a Muslim living in Germany is as Muslim as a Muslim living in Indonesia. And we must be fair, and we must be respectful of that. The second piece of this is, you talked about the politics of all of it. In a post-9/11 world, as we talk about Islam, with the word Islam or Muslim on the pages on and offline every single day since September 11th, 2001, there is a lot of baggage that happens for these millennials. And I want to say that because it connects to your final point, what's happening with extremism.
But can I just put in a question?
Sure.
There? The question, because we're on limited time, is how do you deal as a state with countries like Saudi Arabia? There has been a great deal of skepticism about the United States not being tough enough on the rights of women, whereas in Afghanistan and Iraq, the rights of women have almost been used as one of the contexts for military intervention.
So one of the things that was very important for me was the idea of diversity of Islam. The second was Muslims in Muslim majority countries and Muslims as minorities. And the third, and this is so important, there are 1 billion Muslims under the age of 30 around the world. And this is what is actually the crux of the issue. For them, it is critical that we understand that we can't politicize their populations. You heard woman after woman on the stages yesterday and today talk about the difference between a nation state and the people within those cultures. And so when you pick apart what a country like the United States is doing vis-a-vis you know, a Saudi or a Qatar or an India or a Pakistan, whatever that country might be. We have a relationship between us and those countries based on a lot of different things, but the populations matter. And what I want to really say about this panel and about the way we're framing Islam globally is that we have to understand that with the context of, you brought up the Islamic State and other non-state actors that use the name of Islam for their nefarious means, separate that out. The ideology of an us and them that they're using and manipulating the religion to do is obviously not Islam. But the second piece is the women part. And all over the world, the kinds of young people who are pushing back against that ideology must be brought forward. And that's the message I want to say today.
Okay, now, I want to bring in Ayaan at this point, because what I understood from Hibak was that she believes that there's, you know, there isn't a dialogue possible between her and you, because you come from a war on Islam position, as she puts it. And there is that famous interview of yours, I think in 2007, where you called Islam a nihilistic cult of death. So the question then becomes, for women, if the war is going to be with Islam, what about all the millions of Muslim women who are believers but are fighting within their faith?
Exactly. So that's exactly why I was so incredibly vehement. Because in that same interview, before that and beyond, I consistently make a distinction between Islam as a set of ideas, as an organizing principle, as a faith, and Muslims. And thank you, Farah, for hearing me. When you take Muslims, 1/5 of humanity, of which 1 billion is under the age of 30, you will be amazed, and you find yourselves noting over and over and over again how diverse they are. Okay? So we agree on Muslim diversity. Let's take the doctrine now, Islam. Islam unreformed as a political doctrine, the insistence on not separating religion from politics, unreformed, at this point, insists more on life after death than it does on life before death. So unreformed, it is a nihilistic cult of death. But Muslims, being free agents, can reform it. And Muslims being free agents, and this is what we've seen since the Arab Spring, and that's what inspired me to write my latest book, Heretic, is I'm seeing a growing number of young Muslims who from the inside reject some of the most basic Islamic doctrine. They want a separation of religion from politics. They're fighting for women's rights. Therefore, in order to talk about Islam as a doctrine is not to declare war on Muslims. I embrace Muslims. I reject with absolutely everything in me Islamic law.
Is that why, Ayaan, just briefly, is that why you went from being a declared atheist to now being willing to engage with voices of reform? Would that be correct to say that?
That's a very reasonable question. Because of that Muslim diversity, because of, even in my own circle of friends within my Muslim community, I find more and more individuals who are not shying away from touching on the really sensitive points within the doctrine. And doctrines do not change. You cannot have a reformation if there's nothing to reform. If you go all over the place saying, oh, but Islamic law is perfect, let's condemn the practice of child marriage, but then let's not say nothing about Sharia law, you're not going to change much.
Okay, let me bring in Hibak and Zahra. Zahra.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Again, I will have to say this is misinformation. This is not an informative discussion of Islam. You are reducing Islam. There's no such thing as Islamic doctrine. You are now interchangeably using Islamic doctrine and Islamic Sharia. And this is why I said there is theology, that is immutable, and there's Sharia, which talks about social and political matters. And that part of Islamic doctrine, what she calls Islamic doctrine, this is dynamic. It changed, it evolved from one place to another. Do you know that according to the Hanafi fiqh school of thought, you have to change your school of fiqh, of law, if you travel from one city to another? You don't know that. So there's no such thing as immutable in Islam. So in order to call for a reformation, we need to call for more education. And in order to have, so you have to be informed about what is Islam and that it is not monolithic, as you have been saying.
But Hibak, once we have agreed, and I think we do, you know, despite the fact that we seem to be fighting, we actually agree on a lot of things. We agree on Muslim diversity. We agree that cultures inform Muslim women very, very differently, as they do Hindus and Christian women. And we seem to be agreeing that there is a need for reform in Islam, just like there has been a need. We don't necessarily agree.
No, we agree.
You don't agree that we need to reform. Let me complete my sentence. That we need to reform Islam, just as, let me complete my sentence, just as I would call for reform in the orthodoxies of all faiths that are misogynistic to women, and I believe all faiths are.
Islam is a reformative message in itself. What we need to inform is Muslim minds, Muslims' interpretations, not Islam. That's a big difference.
So she's saying reform Muslims, not Islam.
Yes.
Let me tell you something. Islam has 5 pillars. If I want to have, you know, I want to connect with the audience. How many of you believe that you should give to the poor? How many of you believe that there is only one God? How many? This is what Islam is. Islam is a religion of peace. If you talk about reformation, absolutely there are challenges. Any religion. If you look at the Abrahamic faith, we all remember that story of Eve being in what is the Jannah, in heaven, and all of a sudden she, before Eve, Adam was lonely, and then Eve was created from his crooked rib, not even a straight rib, okay? And then, while she was just wandering around, she decided not to listen to him, and, the culture of Muslims and Jews and Christianity is based on that women should be controlled. So there is culture, there is that culture, but Islam gives the right of women. Islam needs to be, we need to educate young people, and we need to educate the Islamic imams.
What is a terror group that calls itself the Islamic State for you?
This is the whole point. The Western media calls them the Islamic. There is nothing Islamic about them. Islam rejects raping women. Islam rejects killing people, innocent people. There is nothing Islam. But what I want to say, because I want to go back to the child marriages, if you look what the Egyptians are doing, if you look at the new constitutions, there are laws that protect and has increased the child marriages. So there is a lot of discussion. The reformists are the women who are in their countries that are trying to bring change by the law.
Farah, would you have been more comfortable if we had been discussing women and religion and not women and Islam? Just a thought.
It's not a question of comfort. Look, this is a very complicated topic, and we're going in a lot of different directions, and we can do that. But
that speaks to the fact that there is no one easy answer, right?
But the point really is as you think about how complex this topic can be, it means many things to the thousands of people that are in this room. At its base in 2016, as we are looking at issues of terrorism, as we're looking at issues of all kinds of things that are happening globally, the name, as you said, the name of Islam is being mushed into all of this, and it becomes very complicated. But I really want to turn us to actually a more optimistic component here, which is back to sort of what's actually happening on the ground. And if you combine what the last 2 speakers were talking about in terms of understanding what the difference between culture and religion is, talking about education. For me, as I saw vibrant, young, diverse, exceptionally passionate young Muslim millennial females around the world, they do not want to be held back by the discourse that's happening in the media. They are not going to be held back by a victim mentality, which is where everybody puts Muslims these days. But they want to actually tell their own stories. And I really want us to understand that all of the things that we're talking about in our generation as we're having this conversation, 20-somethings and 30-somethings are having a very different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And they're taking back their own narrative about what it means to be modern and Muslim, what it means to be a female Muslim, and most importantly, on the subject that's happening here, what it actually means to unpack in a global, modern era when you are a digital native and with the swish of their finger they can connect ideas around the world, what Islam is going to mean for them for the next 20 years.
Okay, I've got 5 minutes left, so I guess time for some final comments. Ayaan, there are those who would argue, especially from my part of the world, that gender is it's a global debate. It happens in different ways in different cultures. B, it's often very contradictory. And so let me put it to you that in South Asia, there's no fuss about having a female head of state. So even in a Muslim country like Pakistan, you actually have had a woman leading the country, but in the United States of America, this is still a debate. So there are those who would say that your labels of Muslim societies as innately backward doesn't work. Look at this example, Benazir Bhutto.
I'm
asking you, yes.
Oh, I don't know if I said any of that. Again, I go back to my distinction, and I think Farah, you really do make, and you get that distinction. There's Muslim diversity, and within that Muslim diversity, you're going to see people who take a lot of Islamic law and want to get it as pure as possible. But on the other spectrum, you see Muslims, and that makes me optimistic, more and more Muslims who on the inside, you may have heard today that there was a Bangladeshi blogger who was hacked to death on the streets of Dhaka. This has happened frequently in Cairo, in Tunisia, even here in the United States of America. There are more and more Muslims who are not willing to lay the blame of their internal philosophical affairs on external factors like Zionists or the American media or stuff like that. They understand that they need to compete with the Islamists who are pushing for Sharia, and they're pushing back. And I think that's what we need to embrace. And in doing so, and I think the most important way to do it is to acknowledge their fight, which is a dangerous fight. It's a fight where the people that you disagree with on the inside want to kill you. I don't mind arguing with the Islamists and the extremists. They want to kill me, I don't want to kill them.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately the power of the word is going to win, but we have to, with everything in us, protect that freedom of speech from allegations of Islamophobia, from all other kinds of fabricated ways of silencing people, and ultimately from violence.
Farah, what happens when your identity, or anybody's identity as a feminist and as a multiculturalist clashes? In France, for example, France in public schools does not want any overt religious symbolism. So the veil is a problem for French governments, as is the Sikh turban. Muslims would say this is a homogenization of culture. The feminist in me would be confused. You know, what is the veil? Is it a sign of multiculturalism, or is it a sign of oppression?
Look, I am not going to opine on what is the right way to express your own identity. The one thing that I absolutely know, and I want to hit home with this since we have a minute left, the one thing that is key for Muslim millennials is every single day since September 11th, 2001, they have been seeing the word Islam or Muslims on the front page of papers. And this particular generation is having a crisis of identity like no other because they are digital natives. This issue of what they look like, what it means to be Muslim to them, how they decide to act very openly or very quietly, is not a question that we have actually talked about in the media. nor have we talked about it and really understood the impact of that crisis of identity on the way extremists are able to recruit. So I leave you with this.
Would you agree with the French, or you disagree with them?
No, let me tell you, having spent a lot of time in Europe talking to the millennial Muslims out there, the expression of identity means many things. It is not just whether or not you're veiling or not, and I think it is very important that when we talk about this, we don't shortcode things to say Germany is right, France is wrong, Spain should do this, and America should do that.
Okay. Let me just get Zahra. I want to ask both of you, what is the one stereotype about Muslim women that you face all the time that is so far from the truth of your own lives? Zahra.
The first thing is that all Muslim women are one. This is a myth that we need to dispel. The other myth is that Muslim women are submissive, subordinate, and they are not, and actually not seeing that they are agents of change, that they are on the front line, risking their lives in order to advance women's rights. So the last thing these Muslim women need is that to push them to the fringe and to tell them that you have to lose your own faith, your own identity to be considered as progressive as we are. That's the last thing.
So what's the one change you'd like to see in your society?
I'd like to see more equality. I would like to see a reformation in Muslim minds up to the standards and highest principles of Islam on equality, on dignity. That's what I would like to see.
Hibak, does human rights supersede religious rights?
No.
No?
No, absolutely not.
Why would you say that?
Because Islam gives you all the rights as a woman that you need. You just have to understand it, number one. Number two,
so the audience doesn't agree.
It doesn't matter. The audience are from the United States and they like brands. They like people who really can say, well, you know, people who look like them, talk like them, and take their ideas. But the point is here, what I'm more interested...
We're in a very diverse New York City. You can be who you want to here. There's nothing homogeneous here.
I think when you asked about the hijab,
yeah,
I think the people who are pushing for hijab and the people who, you know, for women to put hijab and the people who are pushing her to take it off are the same. Because both of them are taking the right of women to decide what she wants to do.
Those pushing it on and those pushing to take it off.
Yes.
I think we could agree on that. And I am out of time. I think we may have convinced you that there is nothing that you can stereotype on the basis of religion, country, and let's extend that courtesy to the United States of America as well. We don't want to be stereotyped. Let's not stereotype them. Thank you very much.